It was the cold morning of the 21st of December of 1421 on the snowy hills of Kuttenberg. The men of the now blind Jan Žižka, the strategic prodigy of the Hussite movement, gazed across the soon-to-be battlefield. He was surrounded by a sea of banners from many states and cities in Europe. He was outnumbered 4-1 and outmatched in training and equipment, but he was determined to make his stand. The staggering Battle of Kuttenberg was about to begin. The Battle of Kuttenberg took place in the context of the Hussite Wars, which we explained in detail in our first video about Jan Žižka. This video is a direct continuation, so we recommend you check it out if you haven't. After the failure of the first Hussite Crusade in 1420 AD, the Hussites not only hadn't been defeated, but were even more powerful than before. They spent the following year consolidating their possessions in Bohemia.
Vypalte houfnici! Sešikujte se a připravte se na step.
During the first half of 1421, Jan Žižka took an arrow to his only remaining eye, which blinded him completely, and was appointed as the supreme commander of the Hussite armies, as the other main leaders had all been slain. Finally, in the summer of 1421, King Sigismund of Hungary drove an army once more into Bohemian land. The Second Crusade against the Hussites had been declared, and a behemothing force of 80,000 men now marched towards the city of Prague. During the prior year, the Hussites had resorted to waiting in the capital and resisting a siege, but this time Jan Žižka decided to intercept Sigismund's army on the way to Prague at the city of Kuttenberg. The 1st of December of 1421, the Hussite army of Jan Žižka arrived at Kuttenberg. The position of the city was a delicate one, with the majority of inhabitants supporting the Imperial Catholics. However, the presence of many Hussite supporters, as well as the lack of a proper garrison, prevented the Catholics from opposing Žižka, and the Hussite army occupied Kuttenberg without bloodshed. The 20th of December, the foremost contingents of the Titanic Imperial army arrived at Kuttenberg. The enemy was at the gates. Within the walls, the streets of Kuttenberg were a hive of activity as the Hussites prepared to march to battle. Jan Žižka anticipated that the Catholic citizens of Kuttenberg could be a problem, so he had decided to face Sigismund's army in the open, where he could trust every man around him. Thus, in an orderly manner, the men of the blind Czech commander marched out the gates and established a wagon fort on a nearby hill. Jan Žižka had managed to raise an impressive force of close to 20,000 men, accompanied by numerous war wagons and several pieces of artillery. The composition of Žižka's troops was very different from the peasant rebels he had commanded at Nekmiš or Sudomiš. This time, his force was made up of well-trained Czech warriors with professional weapons and armor. The wagons they employed had been optimized for war and were properly manned by crews of gunners and crossbowmen. The Hussite artillery consisted in traditional bombards as well as experimental mortars for crowd control called Hovnitsa, which would later inspire the design of the modern howitzer cannons.
Bratře Žižko, Zikmund přitáhl se svým vojskem. Hleďte, bratři, nepřítel přichází s pýchou, ale padne v hanbě.
Downhill, the vanguard of the massive Crusader army prepared for battle. The bulk of the Catholic forces was made up of Austrian and Hungarian troops, though crusaders from many European states joined Sigismund as well. Like the year prior, King Sigismund of Hungary, who had also declared himself King of Bohemia, commanded the army. Despite the fact that the Hussites were more properly armed this time, the Catholics still held the advantage when it came to armor and training quality, with thousands of heavy knights among their ranks. Additionally, the Hussites were outnumbered at least 4-1, though this was nothing new for the seasoned Czech general.
Je jich více než nás. Bratře Žižko, kolik jich jest, pro boha?
As Sigismund commanded his troops forward, the Hussites prepared for the clash. The staggering Battle of Kuttenberg was about to begin. The mounted Catholic knights were the first to advance. The Hussite artillery fired upon the riders, breaking their lines and overall disrupting their order. As the Imperial knights closed in, they were met with crossbow bolts and gunpowder.
Běžte na koně! Sešlte oheň a peklo na nepřítele!
The result of the initial charge was similar to previous battles. The heavy riders crashed into the fortified wooden wagons and a violent push contest ensued. The different groups of knights, now operating independently, resorted to shock cavalry tactics. With every charge of the Catholic knights, more of them were cut down or trampled. They endured a constant hail of arrows and crossbow bolts and faced volley after volley of the Hussite hand cannons, which were sometimes fired from the wagons themselves. To make matters worse for the attackers, the Hovnitzers kept harassing them from above, shrinking their numbers and, more importantly, damaging their morale. Overall, The initial cavalry assault on the Hussite wagon fort was unsuccessful. However, the second wave of Imperial troops, this time on foot, came shortly after. According to some chronicles, Sigismund's men were now aware of the volleys of projectiles that the Hussites fired from their wagons, so they drove a herd of cattle and other livestock in front of them to protect themselves. However it may be, the infantry, led by the heaviest of knights, charged uphill. Like the cavalry before them, Sigismund's footmen faced gunpowder and steel. The infantry was slightly more effective at dealing with the war wagons, as small groups of men had a chance of slipping between the carts. The Hussite infantry that awaited behind gradually came into action, and the actual hand-to-hand fighting began. By the late afternoon, the Catholic army of Sigismund, though superior in terms of numbers and equipment, was still incapable of breaching Jan Žižka's wagon fort. Most of the cavalry had either been routed or pulled back by their commanders, and their mounted units that remained kept cycling their charges in support of the assaulting infantry. Some sections of the Hussite perimeter had been moved back or slightly pushed apart, but whenever the defenders were given a chance, they rolled the war wagons back in place. The Catholic footmen had endured long hours of pushing and momentary fighting under a constant rain of projectiles, as well as the harassment of the Hussite mortars. Before the almost absolute lack of progress, and with nightfall turning the corner, King Sigismund finally decided to hold the assault and pull back his men. Some zealous Hussites, invigorated by the enemy retreat, charged from behind the wagons, and the last killing of the day took place. By dusk, the Hussites were once more victorious. Jan Žižka had lost his sight, but he hadn't lost his gift for war. On the fight of the 20th of December of 1421, the dead among the Catholic army were counted in the hundreds. The Hussite losses, on the other hand, had been much less significant, and their artillery and leadership remained unharmed. But the Battle of Kuttenberg was far from over, as Sigismund had the numbers to repeat the day 10 times over, and it was clear that the fighting would start again on the next morning. It is unclear what Jan Žižka's plans were for the next day, but most likely we will never know, as an unexpected turn of events befell the city of Kuttenberg. That night, a contingent of the Imperial army rode to the northern gates of Kuttenberg, and to the surprise of the Hussites, they were allowed into the city. Soon, a massacre let loose on the streets as the Catholics searched for the Hussite supporters and mercilessly slaughtered them. Apparently, the Catholic citizens of Kuttenberg had plotted with King Sigismund and had opened the gate for his troops. Jan Žižka's worst fear had come true. When the screams of pain settled, the city was under firm Catholic control. Now, the Hussite wagon fort of Jan Žižka was threatened by the Imperial army in the south, and with their retreat cut off by Kuttenberg in the north. Apparently facing imminent annihilation, Jan Žižka spent the rest of the night coming up with a plan. If you stayed until the end and enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my small channel for weekly Total War documentaries. I script, record, and narrate everything by my own means, so if you could leave a like and comment as a form of support, I would be immensely grateful. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.